Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jake LaQuire. Today, we're going to get into a lot of what ifs, ultimately lost opportunity this past Sunday at Bank of America Stadium against the division rival in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. There were a lot of, I would say, revenge storylines going on between Dave Canales facing off against his old team, Baker Mayfield once again facing the Carolina Panthers. And then it was a battle of firsts. You had two former first overall picks in Baker Mayfield and Bryce Young on the field. You had two rookie running backs making big plays all day with Bucky Irving and Jonathan Brooks. And it was very refreshing at times seeing a lot of what the Panthers offense was doing. And the couple things that I would say kind of held us back were really about the supporting cast between drop passes and a fumble to end the game. But where do you want to kind of start with this? Do we want to talk about Bryce Young or do we want to jump into the negatives?
Let's start positive. And I saw the intro and you called it a lost opportunity. And I'm thankful you did that because if you would have called it missed opportunities, I would have had flashbacks to the Ron Rivera, the end of the Rivera era. So I have to thank you for that one. But yeah, let's start positive because while you mentioned it, there were positives in this game. And this is another week that we see Bryce Young continuing to build and have a really strong performance. Last week against Spags defense, it was all about beating man coverage with his passes. One of the things we talked about, talking about this game coming up, the Buccaneers game, you had concerns about how he would do against zone defense because in prior weeks, zone was not his forte. Bryce was doing better against man coverage, like getting touch passes, accurate passes, beating corners, but the zone was giving him trouble. Well, in this game, he shredded the zone. He of his 32 pass attempts against zone, he completed 23 of them for 242 yards, and the Adam Thielen touchdown, the touchdown, the go-ahead touchdown toward the end of the game. And it's just good to see him doing it against multiple types of coverages. Get it with the man last week, the zone now. Seems like he's really putting it together. He had a lot of good passes. He ran the touchdown in the I believe it was at the end of the first quarter. Just a lot of good stuff there, getting us down into the red zone. But it's once we got to the red zone or on the Bucs side of the field that the mistakes that you're talking about, the lost opportunities, really started rearing its ugly head. And I think we have to start with the result of the decisions from the analytics staffer, Dave Canales. Eddie Pinheiro, who coming into the week is the most accurate field goal kicker in NFL history. I think he still is because Justin Tucker also didn't have a strong performance, but missing two, we can call them gimme field goals to put the Panthers not behind the chain, so to speak, or not behind on the score, but we could have left halftime 19-10 if he makes all his kicks. Now, it could have been more had some refereeing gone right, some decisions gone right, but at the very least, if he makes the kicks, we might not have gone to overtime. We might have won the game. So that's like the first negative that I can think of. Any positives from you before we want to eviscerate the team?
So Bryce Young, the rushing touchdown, and I don't know if you got the same flashback I did, but it was very reminiscent. And obviously he doesn't have the same power and size, but in 2011, Cam Newton is facing the Atlanta Falcons in Atlanta, and it's a third down. He's able to break containment and he goes into the end zone. Now, obviously, he trots on in, does the primetime dance. In this case, Bryce Young dives for the end zone, gets the pylon, does his little dance.
Yeah, and a little shimmy.
Yeah, his shimmy's nice.
Yeah,
And what I will say is it's the aura around him now. It's the confidence. He's playing with swagger. And just that's infectious. This isn't the Bryce that we saw the first couple of weeks. This is a guy that's invigorated. And not only is he making all the plays that he needs to put his team in a position to win, he's doing it with a level of aura that is just infectious. And that's been fun to see.
Yeah, certainly contagious. He's definitely, since coming back into the lineup, pretty clearly the spark that's driving the team to win close games and be competitive in close games. In the all the games except the Broncos game since he's been back, he's actually led a game-winning or game-tying drive in the fourth quarter or overtime if you want to count the Giants game there. But then if the other team gets the ball back again, it seems like they end up winning it, with the Saints game being the exception. But really good to see Bryce having a little swag, putting on a show, doing what he needs to do. I think you mentioned it at the top of the episode, Jonathan Brooks as well. He got, I think, 2 or 3 carries versus the Chiefs, but this was his true debut. And I liked a lot of what I saw from him when we talked about him maybe getting healthy, coming back earlier in the season. I thought he would be the Miles Sanders replacement, like the guy who comes in on third down and catches the ball out of the backfield and makes stuff happen. He did that at a pretty high level, I think. I'm thinking of particularly the one where I'm pretty sure it's Kalijah Kancey just unblocked right in Bryce's face, and he dumps it off over top of the defender to Brooks, who turns it into a little 18-yard scamper. Those are the kind of things Jonathan Brooks can do, catching the ball. And I thought he was good running the ball as well, up until we got into the goal-to-go situation where Dave Canales, I think, wanted to get Jonathan Brooks his first touchdown and keyed in on that instead of more diverse play calling. But we'll get there later. It's nice to see a younger QB and a younger running back performing well when I think a lot of the team around those guys kind of let them down throughout the course of the game.
Yeah, we've kind of talked about the couple bright spots. I will say Bryce Young to be able to go down and drive at the end of the game after having, I think, a 3-and-out the previous drive, taking the first sack of the game. It looked like things could spiral and get out of hand once Baker Mayfield kind of got back in the mix from his injury that happened. And that was cool to see that he was able to, despite kind of having the adversity, taking a step back, was able to drive down and put points on the board to take the lead. Unfortunately, we just left too much time on the clock, and Tampa Bay had too much time to then drive down. And that kind of stuff happens. I texted you, I remember in the game, and we'll get more into this with the negatives. My issue with that was going, okay, you're a 3-8 team. You should be playing to win the ball game. And you should have gone for 2 there. You should have made it a 4-point game and put the pressure on the Bucs to score a touchdown. And you keyed in on this and you said, hey, well, if you don't make it, then you give the Bucs an opportunity to drive down and just win the game straight out. Right. And like, yes and no, what happens is when you're a team this bad and devoid of talent is you're going to have mistakes that happen. And we saw that in overtime after they missed the field goal and we put ourselves in a position to win the game. Chuba Hubbard ends up fumbling after a phenomenal Thielen grab. And I think this is a good way to segue into the negatives is Thielen made the touchdown grab to take the lead, obviously makes the one-handed grab to put us in a situation to win the ball game. But earlier in the first half, he bobbles a pass in the end zone, regains control, knee and elbow touchdown, and the refs, after review, continue to stay with the call on the field that it was incomplete pass. And so I don't know if they need more cameras in the end zone to get different angles on the back end zone line. But that was awful because that's 4 points that you pretty much left on the field that really had nothing to do with penalties or execution. It was just a lack of, I don't even know to say judgment. It was just,
I think preparation is a good way to put it because I think it was the VP of this was a Fox game, I believe, if I'm remembering that correctly. They said that they didn't have as many cameras at this game as they do normally. Like this is a $1 billion corporation. Like I know we're the Panthers, right? We're one of the worst teams in the league, but you can't let that slide. And then I know that the one official. I want to say it was like the back judge, the guy who sits behind the offensive line. He gets hurt early in the game. He actually has to get carded on the, I think it was the Panthers' first set of downs, first possession. They cart him off the field, and so they're down a ref and they're down cameras, I guess. But like that can't be left up for debate, especially when it looked like Thielen had regained control. But you're mentioning it, right? If Thielen snags it at first, like with his hands and brings it down, that's not a discussion. Then we have David Moore, who dropped a couple passes. Xavier Legette, he makes some good end zone plays, but he still seems to drop some passes. That was one of my concerns with him coming into the league. Felipe Franks, the reserve tight end, he's usually a special teamer. On the second play of the game, drops like a 20-yard seam ball. Bryce places it perfectly. It was covered pretty well, but hits him right in his hands, drops it. And Tommy Tremble dropped an early ball, but I thought Tremble really made up for it and had like close to a career game, I think, in the second half and down the stretch, especially the play where Bryce on the third down rolls like all the way back, finds Tremble like 20 yards down the field, and we get a 40-yard gain from that. But yeah, the drops were killer, especially in the second half, because we had built up. The score didn't reflect how much we had dominated in that first half. We had 6 scoring opportunities. We missed some field goals. We made a couple, and we got a touchdown there. But we were crushing them. Like there was no real competition. Their run game hadn't gotten going yet. But then the drop started happening in the second half. Got the Bucs back into it, and then we were the ones playing from behind at that point. And our defense is not equipped to stop the run, and that was another big factor in this game. They allowed close to, or actually over 200 yards if you count the overtime yardage in there. That's another thing too. The defense has to. I know they sacked Baker a couple of times. I know they stole some picks away from him. Those are more on Baker than anything else. But the defense has to play more cohesive too. But the drops, the kicks, the defense, all of it's just really bad. And I think it all starts at the top. And I know you're pretty keen to talk about the decisions that Dave Canales made regarding going for field goals, the end of the game, like you were talking about, going for the extra point. That was one of the biggest, I don't want to say red flags, but one of the biggest negatives of this game, because I thought he had called an actual great game play calling wise and sequencing up until the red zone. But then the decisions that he made regarding field goals and stuff like that, those were all negatives in my opinion.
Yeah, before we jump into some of the analytical based decisions, I think going back and looking at just David Moore, Tommy Tremble, in my opinion, Jalen Coker, JT Sanders being out, those are guys getting targets. They probably corral some of those. And as much as I want to get on them for those drops, they also made phenomenal catches and plays throughout the game regardless. So it's one of those things that those are to be expected with tertiary options, backup guys. And the fact that they were still making plays is a great sign for this offense. But again, when you're a 3-8 team and you're settling for field goals in the first half, when you are driving the ball, when you can keep putting the pedal down to the metal, is it pedal to the metal? Yeah, there we go. I'm getting my sayings already mixed up. It's a typical podcast here with me and my sayings, but going back to just that idea of you have to just keep it full throttle. You have to keep going. You're in a 4th and 1, you're in a 4th and 3 situation, and you're settling for 3 points. And I think it's a slap in the face to literally a few days before this game, give your flowers and props to Brant Tillis and Eric Eager in the building. And then you kind of pussy out. Like, I don't want to say like, it's one of those things that if you want to talk about like we are grown professional men, then do grown professional things. Keep your star players out in the field. They're cooking, and have faith in them. We saw this work and has worked over the past several years with Dan Campbell over in Detroit. You got to have that mentality of you're just in it to win it. And that was lost there. And then again, on top of those field goals, when you're in a situation to go up 4, to put the nail in the coffin, you don't. And it's those kind of situations that are going to lend yourself to losses. And what sucks is I had brought this up about the Saints and the Giants game. They had a higher success rate. They quote unquote should have won those games. Mm-hmm. We had the higher success rate this week against Tampa Bay. We should have won that game, and we left way too many opportunities on the field. And I know people want to go and point towards the drops and the Chuba Hubbard fumble, but those things are going to happen when you're a young building team. To me, it's those small win probability decisions you can make in game throughout the course of the 60 minutes that make a bigger difference than some of those plays that we've even gone more in the depth with over the past few minutes.
For sure. And when you're trying to establish a culture, right? We want to be a tough team that can run the ball. As Canales has said multiple times, the offense goes through Chuba. We're going to be a strong team up front, and then Bryce plays his part. I think we can agree Bryce has done that the past 2 weeks. He's probably done more than play his part. But if we're going to be this tough team that can get tough yards, especially Dave Canales likes to use Chuba when we have like 3rd and 4-ish scenarios. He likes to use them to get chunk yards. And even if we don't get it, go for it down the field. That just didn't take place today. The 2 missed field goals that we had in the first half, one was a 4th and 1, and the other was a 4th and 2. like if we can't believe that Chuba Hubbard or even Jonathan Brooks in there can't get that 1 or 2 yards, like what is the culture of this team? You mentioned it. We're 3-9 now, but we were a 3-8 team at this point in the game. What do we have to lose? We need to build a mentality of like, hey, we're gonna go get it. That's what I guess 2 weeks ago was about with the Chiefs, driving down the field at the end of the game, giving it to Chuba to get the 2 points. That's what at the end of this game was about, having Bryce put the ball in his hands, drive down the field and go get it. But early in the game, when you quote take the points and just leave opportunities on the table, I just don't understand it. I had tweeted it out. Like, this was the reward for the cowardly decisions, was the missed field goals. And we, despite Eddie being one of the best kickers accuracy wise in NFL history, we know that his one of the plant leg, his knee is injured. That injury came out when he was celebrating the game-winning field goal versus the Giants, if you remember that. So he's not at 100%. So even though he was making some field goals in this game, is that not like a part of the decision in the back of your mind? I don't know. I don't know if it came down from, I think George Lee is the head of analytics and like decision making, the guy who's in Canales' ear during the game. I'm not sure if like it came down from there, or if it was Canales' decision himself for the field goal attempts, or if it was like a group, like many opinions, and they decided to settle for the field goals. But throughout the rest of the season down the stretch, like I would like to see us try to go for this, because I know John Ellis from the Roar podcast kind of compared us to the Lions when Dan Campbell took over to start the year, and you mentioned it too. Like the Lions when Campbell took over, they were a pretty bad team year one. They were 3-13-1, excuse me. And then it was 3-13, then 7-8-1, and then they started like turning things around. I think we're in that kind of first year. Like, I think we have foundational pieces, but we need to be the gritty team, the team that's willing to go for it and go get it. And you see that reflected in Dan Campbell's team now. Even last year versus the Cowboys, when the fourth down stuff was happening and they were backed up and kept going for it and didn't get it. When he was asked about it, he was like, that's just our process. That's who we are. It doesn't matter if it's this or that. We're going to keep going for it. That's what I would like to see come from the Panthers. And I'm not sure Canales is ready to have that mentality yet. But as a team that is 3-9 heading to Philly, to the link this week when we have nothing to lose, if we get down in their like 25-yard line, it's 4th and 1. I need to see us going for it, because like, what do you have to lose?
Yeah, if opening drive, you get in a 4th and 1 situation and say you're inside the red zone and you're not going for it, you know the other team has Saquon Barkley, one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, and then Jalen Hurts on the tush push. Like they're going to win all the short yardage situations. They're probably going to hang 200 plus rushing yards on our porous run defense. And it's one of those things that if you want to stay in a game like that, you need to like put points on the board and not settle for field goals. And that is the mentality that needs to be embraced by this team. I'm just hoping, just like a lot of these past weeks have been learning experiences for Bryce Young, given different situations, that Canales learns from this, that he becomes like a riverboat Ron, that like, hey, I was a little bit conservative early on, but I understand that from a mentality standpoint, we need to have this aggressiveness. And I think that feeds also into the defense. I don't know if Evero plays necessarily as loose if we say miss the 2-point conversion and it's 22-20 there at the end. I don't know if the personal foul happens where they get an extra 15 right off from the kickoff.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
And it's those kind of mental miscues that I think would have been cleaned up. There would have been a little bit more tightness. We would have sent pressure against Baker, who was dealing with the injury. And we saw when he second guessed certain reads earlier in the game, he would go to scramble or move out of the pocket, and Jadeveon Clowney or one of our defensive linemen would make a play. And that's what I expected to see on some of those drives. That was some of the issues that I know both you and I had growing up watching Ron Rivera and Sean McDermott in certain situations late in the game. I think the game that comes to mind is like the 2012 game against the Chicago Bears. And we dominate most of that game. And then we play loose, lackadaisical coverage that allowed Jay Cutler to have a game-driving series. And Matt Ryan did it against us, I think, also again in 2012 in Atlanta after we didn't go for it on a 4th and short. And it's those different, like just small plays that add up. And when you're playing at this level, the margin of error is already small. When you have a talent devoid roster, it's even smaller. So take advantage of those opportunities and put your team in a position to win, because there's no, I would say, gimme games going the rest of the way. Yes, you're going to have winnable games against the Buccaneers, against the Falcons. Maybe you could throw in the Cowboys and Cardinals, depending on how they look coming into those games. But that's that kind of mentality that has to be changed if you want to establish a winning culture.
Yeah, and to talk about the defense more real quickly, the end of the Giants game was the exact same thing. They played super off coverage, basically willing to concede the game tying field goal attempt. Now, obviously, it was actually the irony here is that they get the ball first in overtime, the Giants do, and then we recover their fumble. Well, in this game, the Bucs got it first, and then they missed the field goal, and we have a chance, and then at the end, we lose the fumble, and the Bucs drive down. So yeah, I'd like to see a bit more pressure on imperative drives late in the game, but maybe Evero realizes we don't have the horses for that. But like then again, we were getting pressure on Baker throughout the game, like you said, when he was forced into making later decisions, bad things happen. It was just like the Mahomes play where he scampered down the sideline. Baker was like hobbling down the field when he picked up the first down to get them into field goal range. Like I'm just not sure how you can allow that to happen. But hey, hopefully we draft some defenders or something, because I don't know where the change is going to come from on the defensive side if Evero ends up staying, is the point I would say.
I think where it's going to come down to is you're getting Derek Brown in, who's a great interior run stuffer. And if you have a top 5 pick, if you're able to grab a guy like Mason Graham out of Michigan and you're able to kind of shore up that interior and make a weakness a strength, that changes a lot of what you can do on the defensive end. I don't know if Evero is the future. We're going to see what those discussions lead to in the offseason. We've seen other defenses have inferior talent and still perform better than what I think this group is. But again, I think these are conversations for the offseason. I don't see him getting fired in the middle of the season or towards the end. So unless he has an abysmal performance, allows a couple 50 burgers out of nowhere, I think this is just kind of ride it out and evaluate in the offseason. But talking about coaches and coach decisions, as much as I want to kind of nag on Canales for not making some of these more analytical, smart decisions, what on Thursday, on Thanksgiving, the first game out of the slate, the Chicago Bears really had no business being in that game. You get down, I think it was like 23-0 in the first half, and you rally back. The Lions have a couple injuries. They're not able to get anything going, and it seems like the momentum is starting to swing in your favor. You get down into your opponent's 30-yard line, snap a play inside your opponent's 30-yard line. And I want to put this in perspective for people. And I don't know the exact number, but I knew it was around 1,500. There's been about 1,500 scenarios where a team's gotten inside the 30-yard line in a 1-3 point game. And all of those instances, teams have either like scored the go-ahead touchdown or they've attempted a field goal. The Bears didn't even attempt a field goal. Like, you have a timeout in your back pocket. You're watching the clock tick down from, I don't know if it was like 22 seconds or whatnot, but you just see it go all the way down to 7 seconds. Caleb Williams apparently changes the play. And then instead of like throwing towards the sideline or finding a short outlet, he's shooting the ball to inside the 10-yard line with 2 Detroit Lions defenders there. So you can put the blame on Caleb Williams in that moment, but most definitely Matt Eberflus for not calling a timeout when you're approaching the 10-second mark and you want to have an opportunity to send this to overtime. And sure enough, the day after he gets fired, but this is head scratching. Like I said, we've seen 1,500 occurrences similar to this, and teams have at least attempted a field goal. They didn't even get that. And it's just mind boggling.
Yeah, so obviously in that game, Caleb Williams gets sacked. Really, the tackles, I don't know what it was. I think it was going to be a QB draw or something. Who knows? But he gets sacked like instantly, right? There's about 30 seconds left on the clock. Everybody gets lined up around 22 seconds. But then, like you said, Caleb Williams points to the sideline, points to Thomas Brown, changes the play. You see him doing this. That's probably one of their signs for one of their quick go-ahead plays. And so he has to wait for, I think it's the tight end Komet to get set. And at that point, there's about 11 seconds left on the clock and doesn't snap it, waits till about 6 or 7 seconds, like you said, then snaps it. And instead of dirting it or throwing it to the sideline, like you said, throws it down the field where like the best case scenario would have been, because he wasn't going to catch it. Maybe a PI, but I don't know. Like at the end of maybe it was an untimed down. Who knows? Caleb Williams handled that like pretty horrendously. I can't lie. He had a really good second half, but that sequence was not good. But he's a rookie QB. Matt Eberflus is not a rookie head coach. You want to talk about Canales' mistakes? This is his first time doing it at the top, so I can give him some credit there. Eberflus has been doing this for 3 years. If you know that your QB's in such a bad situation, bail him out. Call the timeout. Caleb Williams isn't the only guy who can call timeout there. The coach can do it too. In fact, in those situations, they usually have a ref standing right here. It's like so the coach can like get him, be like, "Hey, timeout, timeout." Why didn't he do that? And then to say in the presser at the end of the game that, hey, this is kind of a teaching experience, right, for Caleb Williams. Like these are going to be scenarios that he'll face in his career. So like this was something we didn't want, but this is the outcome that happened, and it is what it is. And then he gets fired like an hour later because the Bears allowed him to have his press conference the next day. Apparently, while Ryan Poles and is that the Hallis family, the Bears, like while they were meeting, it was Eberflus's press conference. Why couldn't they have had their meeting before he got to the building or the night before? It's just a very, very poor way to handle the end of the game, to handle the situation regarding the coach and his firing. And to me, to handle it going back to the offseason, because we had talked about this. This is exactly what they did with Justin Fields when they drafted him. Matt Nagy was still there. He started Andy Dalton for, I think it was like 3 games at the start of the Justin Fields tenure, and then Fields comes in there. And then they fire Matt Nagy after year 1. They're doing the same thing with Caleb Williams. And while I think there's more talent around Caleb Williams, while I think Williams is probably better in structure, or like he has a higher ceiling in structure, I don't know if he's going to work out if all of this incompetence around him doesn't get solved. And now, like, what do we do with Ryan? It's Poles, right? I always get him and Ryan Pace mixed up. What do we do here with him? Because outside of robbing Scott Fitterer, I'm not seeing a ton of stuff going well for him in a year where they won 7 games last year. Their expectation was playoffs this year because they upgraded at QB, and then they have a top 10 receiver pick. They spend all this money in free agency, and it's all going downhill. How does that reflect onto him, who now has to hire a new head coach while he's probably on the on the hot seat there? Like it's just a bunch of incompetence. It was the same problem with the Panthers when they brought in a coach who didn't have a GM, then hired a GM, then fired that coach, who then hired another coach. Like it has to all be like together at the same time, and it's just not working out for him. And you see the product reflected on the field with the close losses. I think that's a symptom of that. Like, is Eberflus directly responsible for a blocked field goal or a loss in overtime or the Hail Mary? No, but he is a defensive coach and doesn't have Tyreek Stevenson in place. He doesn't call the timeout for Caleb Williams. Teams allegedly know that they block poorly on the left side of the line, so that doesn't get addressed on field goal situations. It all comes back to the head coach, and I think, at least after his comments, I think they had to get him out of there. Now, I don't know if it's going to make a difference down the stretch, but it's just a very, very bad situation in summation, I guess, to bring it all back together. The Bears are not in a good spot. And you talk about the expectations going into the season. I know you had them as a fringe wildcard team. I was a bit lower, but it's certainly not looking like the Bears wanted it to look this season. And this was the latest example of that.
Bad teams stay bad. And I think that's going to be the theme throughout around the NFL. We wanted to kick it off with the Bears because, again, I don't think we've ever quite seen an end of game sequence unravel like that. And I know there was a statement he made in the initial press conference directly after the game, and he was like, "We handled that fine." Like the end of game, like, no, you didn't. Like that was one of the worst like ways you could handle it. And that's what I like. It comes to a head when you aren't taking accountability for a bad sequence, when you aren't trying to harp more on the fact that, hey, this is a learning experience. We're not expecting to make the playoffs. We weren't even expecting to be in this game. And so to be in that situation, yes, is it unfortunate? Yes, were there mistakes made? But we can learn from those. There was none of that. And when a leader can't take accountability, you have what you have in Chicago. And it's the reason why Thomas Brown has now been promoted from not only passing game coordinator to OC to now OC to head coach or the interim. He's a leader. He takes that accountability. And we saw that in Carolina, regardless of how we feel about his sequencing or his play calling. And so that's what's got to come to a head. And the fact that the Bears now, their last 3 quarterbacks that they've drafted in the top like 10 or 15 picks, Mitch Trubisky immediately fired John Fox after drafting him that year. Then they draft Fields, like you said, fire Matt Nagy the year they hire him. And then you bring in Caleb Williams, the heir apparent, and you don't bring in a head coach with him. You could have tried to either grab like a Cliff Kingsbury, at least from an OC standpoint, that you would feel confident promoting upwards if you didn't like the situation. But now you have to go back to the drawing board, figure out who makes the most sense, whether it's a Ben Johnson, whether it is a Cliff Kingsbury, as being that guy that can help develop your quarterback of the future so you guys can get back into the playoffs and be a competitive football team, because that's not the case. Now, another team that is spiraling, they fired their head coach, their general manager already this year, are the New York Jets. And a lot of it has to be blamed and put on Aaron Rodgers. And the fact that Woody Johnson thought a player, regardless of how decorated he is in his career, to have final say on so many things regarding the roster. And this is the first time we've seen Aaron Rodgers in a game blow a 14-point lead at home. And he did it against the Seahawks. We saw Geno Smith and Leonard Williams be key contributors in their revenge games against the Jets. And again, the theme is teams with high expectations coming into the season. They were bad organizations, bad teams to begin with, and they stay bad. Like, that is just like the moral of the story up to this point.
Yeah, and real quick on the Bears before we go to the Jets, with Thomas Brown being promoted to the interim head coaching spot, I'm kind of worried how that affects their offense. Clearly, it was not a huge upgrade, but Thomas Brown was able to get Caleb Williams to play football where Shane Waldron wasn't at the end of his tenure. But now who's going to be that guy for Caleb Williams while Thomas Brown has to manage the whole team? So it's just like, I don't know, like bricks are being pulled out of the foundation there. But then the Jets, like you're talking about, it is Aaron Rodgers, but to me, it's Woody Johnson. He's made these mistakes like since we've been alive, really. Like, yeah, they were competitive with Rex Ryan for a bit, but that was like 3 years. And they have the longest playoff drought in the National Football League currently. It might be in all of major sports since the Sacramento Kings have made the playoffs the past couple years. So horrible outlook there, like you're talking about. They fired their coach, I thought, too early, whereas I think Eberflus probably deserved it. Don't know why the Saleh firing happened. And I was actually watching this game because I had the courtesy of watching Red Zone in the 1 o'clock period, because usually the Panthers play, and I want to focus in on that, but they didn't this week. So watching Red Zone, and I'm like, man, the Seahawks special teams are quite horrible. The Jets might actually get one of their wins here. And nope, it all fell apart. Leonard Williams, like you said, 92-yard pick six. Then Geno Smith puts it together at the end of the game. I actually didn't realize that it was a revenge game for Leonard Williams because I associate him with the Giants so much. But actually, Geno and Leonard Williams both have Jets and Giants ties and are now both on the Seahawks and get their win here. You talk about how Rodgers has never blown a 14-point lead at home. It actually reminded me of the Fail Mary back in, I think it's 10 years ago now, or maybe 11 years ago. That was against the Seahawks, right? And maybe the Seahawks just have his number. I don't know, but I certainly thought they were in position to win this game. Didn't happen. They're now at, let me consult Tankathon real quick for their record, 3-9, just like us. Currently slated to pick 6th overall. That's not going to get you Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward if that was the direction that they were going to lean. So, yeah, I don't know what the Jets are doing. We talk about them, it seems like every other week. They're in like a nebulous area. I know Jason Fitzgerald at the Over the Cap podcast, he talks a lot about him because he's a Jets fan. And there's no positivity around that organization. At least with us, we can say, hey, Bryce's resurgence is good, right? Canales' play calling, I think, is good. The Bears is Caleb Williams. He is just a rookie. Maybe he can turn it around. Where's the bright spot here for the Jets? Like,
there is.
Just give me one. There's not. Yeah, that's the point.
And it sucks to say, but they were a team that doubled down with the roster that they had, and it blew up in their face. And it's just the testament to the theme of this section. And I think when we talk about a team doubling down, something that was very reminiscent, and it's a lesson that I took away from the Panthers early on and just about NFL teams in general, is the 2008 year the Carolina Panthers go 12-4. We had a first round bye. We get stomped. Our response was, hey, we're still a good team. We should keep the band together. Keep the band together. I think returned 20 or maybe even close to 22 of all the starters that we had in 2008. So you'd think we would be a good team going into 2009. Well, we were a 500 team. We missed the playoffs, and we ended up moving on from Jake Delhomme that year and ended up going in a different direction to the point where we ended up drafting Cam Newton a couple years later. But this next team I want to talk about, they just got to the Super Bowl. They've been a good team on the doorstep the past couple years. They decided to double down with a roster. And the front office, and what I mean by the front office is kind of the guys in the room, the ownership group, weren't really keen on extending everybody in the building in San Francisco. Guys like Brandon Ayuk or paying Trent Williams and Christian McCaffrey. And all this money gets shelled out in the offseason because Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch are sold on these guys being the solution, being the answer for them getting back to the promised land. And it blew up in their face. This is a 5-7 team. Christian McCaffrey is probably done for the rest of the year. I think he's out for the next 6 weeks with a PCL injury. You had Brandon Ayuk, I think a torn ACL earlier in the year. Trent Williams has been banged up. Deebo Samuel can't separate. And now Jordan Mason is on IR. And their defense is a complete sieve. There's just so many holes on this team. And what went from a Super Bowl favorite, Super Bowl darling last year to a middle of the pack, maybe even below average team at this point that has been stomped the past 2 weeks. I mean, we're talking about 38-10 a couple weeks ago. And then on primetime in Buffalo with the snow, you lose 35-10. I mean, this is just embarrassing at this point. And I don't see any argument for Purdy getting a $60 million contract. And if the 49ers are dumb enough to do that, they're going to be a very bad team for years to come.
Yeah, well, you've said it. The three guys that they wanted to pay in the offseason, that's Ayuk, McCaffrey, and Trent Williams. They're not playing right now. And they haven't played together at all this year because McCaffrey didn't start the year. Williams is out now, and Ayuk's out for the rest of the year. Their offense right now is, hey, throw it up to Kittle and hope he mosses 3 people in the end zone. You talked about what's going to happen if they pay Purdy. I don't even think they can afford to with all the money they've invested into this team. One of the big topics when we did our off-season episodes was because they seem to tease us every week. Where's Ayuk going? Is this the week he's getting traded? He's going to the Steelers, right? No, he's going to go play with his old college QB in Washington. They probably should have done those deals, but is that going to be the same talk next offseason? Because they have so much money invested into Trent Williams because they redid his deal. They extended Christian McCaffrey. I don't know if it's funny money or not, but I know at least in this year and next year, he's getting more money. Sufferer of the Madden curse, by the way. Hope he gets well pretty soon. But then, yeah, Debo's making more money. Kittle, I'm sure, is going to be up for an extension soon. He's not getting any younger either. I don't even think they're going to be able to afford to pay Purdy. And this year is showing why they probably shouldn't. He's not the top 5 EPA guy this year that he was last year because he's not insulated by the perfect system that Kyle Shanahan seems to run. And so I think you're right. This is a team that had Super Bowl expectations, and it's all come crashing down. This is the team out of all the teams, actually, the Jets I'm probably worried about the most. But outside of that, I'm pretty worried about the Niners because unless they can find another Brock Purdy, like a late round guy that they can pay $15 to for the next 3 years to come in and run their super paid system, I don't see where they're going to go from here. And then that's not even talking about the defense, which has sustained its own fair share of injuries. Talanoa Hufanga, the all-pro safety, has been banged up throughout this year. They still don't have Dre Greenlaw back, who tore, I think it was his ACL, right, in the Super Bowl last year. This is not a complete team whatsoever, and they can't rely on one side to carry the other side like it's been so frequent in years past for them. And this is just another team that's going downhill, and it's tough to see because you talked about how they had been competitors for the Super Bowl in the past couple of years. You could argue that in the 2 that they've been to in the Mahomes era, I guess that's what we're calling this era of the NFL now, they choked those games away. They were probably the better team, and they had the chance to win those, couldn't come away with either. And now that window is looking more and more shut and further away than ever for that team.
Yeah. And another team that I won't say necessarily doubled down, but believe that they had the offensive infrastructure to where you could just plop a quarterback in and go, were the Atlanta Falcons. And of the couple teams that we've talked before, I definitely thought the Bears would be a fringe wild card team. I thought they would get the 7th seed. And the next team that we'll talk about in this section, I also thought they would be a wild card team. But these teams that we talked about, the Jets And now the Niners and the Falcons, I thought would all miss the playoffs. And the Falcons, they started hot. They were able to pull off some wins that they probably should have been. And now all of a sudden, they seem to be imploding. I mean, some very, very bad losses recently. I don't think Kirk Cousins has thrown a touchdown over the last 3 games, which is something he has never done in his career. Threw 4 interceptions against the Chargers this past Sunday in Atlanta, despite Atlanta's defense holding the Chargers offense in place for one of their worst performances all year. So with all that going on, the Falcons don't seem to be that quarterback away to win the NFC South. They're still definitely in the driver's seat. The path is still in their favor with their tiebreakers over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But it's one of those things that if Kirk Cousins continues to play this way, do we see Michael Penix sooner rather than later?
Yeah, that's their way out, right? They got to hope that Penix is like ready and able to operate the offense. We know he's healthy, but is he going to be able to go in there and take the step? Because Kirk Cousins was throwing some ducks out there. Like some of those picks, the one in the back of the end zone is one of the worst picks I've seen in recent memory where, yeah, he's getting pressure, but he doesn't try to push it out of the back of the end zone. He just floats it up there. Like, does he think Drake London is Calvin Johnson? Or did he thinks he's in Atlanta now? Does he think that was Julio Jones back there? No, this isn't like a superstar guy that's going to box out 17 DBs and go make the catch. And that was just 1 of 4 that he threw. And you mentioned it. This was probably the Falcons' best defensive performance all year. They had Herbert like boxed up. The Chargers offense outside of Ladd McConkey was non-existent. And yet they still sold that game. Like you said, they're still first in the NFC South. They beat the Buccaneers twice early in the year. So that's a good boon for them there. But yeah, I think the only path out is if Michael Penix can come in and play well and sustain enough wins for them on offense, because that defense is still terrible. But here's the thing too. We talked about what if the Niners paid Purdy? What if the Jets signed somebody else expensive next year, right? The Falcons did sign somebody expensive, right? They're not off the hook for Kirk Cousins next year. They still have to pay him. I think there's an out after year 2, but they still have to pay that guy. And unless he can be a backup for the time being and Penix comes in and runs the show, this is a team that's going to end up missing the playoffs. And I think you nailed it on the head with your season prediction. I think you had the Buccaneers first in the division. Then I think you had the Falcons last, actually, right? You had Bucs, Saints, Panthers, Falcons, I think was your order. If it continues that way, it might end up that way. I don't know. The Saints are pretty bad. We're pretty bad, but it could be the Buccaneers at the top is what I'm saying. But super disappointing for a team like all the teams we've mentioned so far going into the year. If you're looking at betting and stuff like that, they were all expected to win the division or make the playoffs, those 4 teams. And all 4 of them seem to be spiraling pretty poorly right now. This 5th one, I don't think is spiraling, so to speak, but it's just one side of the ball can't keep up with the other side.
I mean, there have been 7 teams or 7 losses this year that the team that lost scored 30 or more points. Of those 7 losses, the Bengals have 4 of them. They are 2-4 when they score 30 or more points. One of their victories actually coming against the Carolina Panthers in Charlotte. But when you look at just how the Bengals defense is constructed, they've lost guys like DJ Reader, Jesse Bates, some of their stars that were on defense that helped propel them to a Super Bowl run are now a little bit older. Jermaine Pratt, Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard. Those guys aren't necessarily the stars they once were. I think Trey Hendrickson is still one of the top sack leaders in the NFL, so he's still getting production. But when you have Russell Wilson throwing for over 400 yards after having a pick 6, like your defense actually finally does something, and you allow a 40-burger to get put on you, it puts your offense in a situation going against a tough Steelers defense that they have to score, and they have to score often. I think Jamar Chase made the comment after the game where he was like, the expectation for the offense is we got to score every drive. And so until they fix that side of the ball, it's very hard to see this to be a competitive team and a stacked AFC. And what's hard to think about is you already paid Joe Burrow. You're going to have to pay Jamar Chase. T. Higgins probably isn't going to be on the team, so your offense is going to take a step back. And then you have to invest resources, draft capital, and whatever you have left from a spending standpoint from the cap on the defense. And you got to hope that works. And if it doesn't, I mean, this team is going to be back where it is right now next year, where the offense is just fighting for its life to stay in games.
Yeah, scoring 30 points and losing with pick 6s and stuff. take a look last night. What happened with the Broncos and the Browns, right? The Browns almost did it, but they threw a lot of picks or 2 pick sixes, excuse me. But yeah, the offense is fighting for its life with the Bengals. Jamar Chase is probably going to triple crown. Burrow leads the league in passing yards, but you let the Pittsburgh Steelers score 40 on you? What are we talking about? Jamar Chase said, we're going to have to score on every drive. You did that against the Washington team earlier in the year and lost. There were no punts in that game. There were no turnovers, and you still lose. How are you going to be able to compete that way when you have a defense that might be as bad or worse than the Panthers? Like, who knows? You talked about one of the games that they won, one of the games they were 2-4, whatever. We almost came back in that game. There were just mistakes down the stretch. So, like, I don't know what's going to be the thing with the Bengals. I thought that they would be competitive at least. I actually had them winning the division this year. And the offense is certainly good enough to do that. It's just the defense is approaching historically bad levels. If the offense were bad, you remember talking about how our point differential was like so crazy. If their offense was bad, they might be approaching that territory too. But luckily, Burrow and Chase have locked in this year. And then you mentioned it. T. Higgins is certainly going to get a bag from like the Patriots or somebody who has like a ton of spending. Maybe the Cardinals. I know they have spending room too. But
Commanders could.
Commanders
they
as
were
well.
trying
Yeah.
to be Brandon Ayuk suitors last year or
Like,
last offseason.
it's not going to get better for them is the point. And if you have the Steelers doing this, who are currently leading the division still, the Ravens are still a super strong team. And now the Browns, at least with Jameis Winston, have an offense. Their defense is still a question, but they're competitive now. There's just no path forward in this for this team in this division. And a team that I thought could go from worst to first might still be worst at the end of this season. Maybe they have to try it again next year or the year following. This one isn't necessarily a spiral, but it's just hard to see this team when their expectations were so high to be fighting for their lives like you're talking about and just come up short every week because they can't score 40 or more every week.
Yeah. No, and I think that about kind of ties in everything and all of our frustrations about teams that came into the season with higher expectations. I think you saw the Bengals winning the AFC North prior to the season starting. I don't think any of us were aware that the Bengals defense would be this bad. If they were even close to just a little bit below average, this is a team probably in playoff contention. That's right in the mix of things that we're talking about with the Bills, the Ravens, the Chiefs for being title contenders. And they're just not that team. So they got to go back to the drawing board this offseason. But what we have to do to wrap up this episode is get in the perfect takes. And I finally hit on a take after several weeks of kind of a dry spell. I thought 6+ road teams would win on Sunday. I think 8 in total won. It was just a day of the visitors, so to speak. And one of those visitors were the Seattle Seahawks in New York. And they will be again on the road against the division opponent that they just beat 2 weeks ago in the Arizona Cardinals, who are themselves coming off a very emotionally draining loss against the Minnesota Vikings. And while I've been confident about the Seahawks all year, I think that confidence continues, and the Seattle Seahawks continue to build their lead in the division, and they sweep the Cardinals this year. So I think that they go into Arizona, they handle business, they correct some of the mistakes that they've had on special teams and offense, and they get the ball rolling as we head into kind of the end of the season, the December wrap up, where you got to kind of secure seeding and your place in the division and your place in the conference. And I think Mike McDonald and Geno Smith are up to the task.
For sure. Talking about an emotional loss. I was fed up with some of Canales' decisions. Don't know why Jonathan Gannon settled for the field goal there, and Greg Olson on the call said it perfectly. If you're going to go for 6, they're going to come down and score, and it's what they did, and they end up losing to the Vikings, who 10-2 now, I believe the Vikings. I don't think anyone saw that coming. If you want to talk
Kevin
about
O'Connell should be coach of the year.
Predictions, yeah, I think that would be a really good one. He won it when they won 13 games as well, right? So.
I think it was Brian Dable who won that year. I don't know if he
you're
won
right.
it.
You're right. No, you're right. Because that's a much better job making Daniel Jones look good. Who, ironically, is a Minnesota Viking now. But that's an interesting one. The last time you said the Seahawks would sweep someone didn't go too well. So we'll have to see about that one. There's another interesting game coming up this week as the Panthers do go up to Philly to the Link, your second team, your home away from home, Philadelphia. I'd kind of jump in the gun because you do the team, like the game preview on Thursday, but I had to jump on this one now. Multiple Eagles will have 100-yard games this week. Saquon might have another performance like he had a couple weeks ago that got me a fantasy football playoff bye week. I know you're in the playoffs this week as well in our main league, so shout out both of us. But I think he's going to have 100, and I think AJ Brown is going to have 100 as well, because we have an obsession for some reason of not putting JC Horn on the best player throughout the game. I tweeted it during the game, and I kind of regret it a little bit, because the next play where Mike Evans gets on JC Horn is a touchdown. But that's more of a credit to Mike Evans. He had a one-handed touchdown grab. That's whatever. But Saquon 100 at least. And, if Devontae Smith comes back, maybe it's him. I think there are multiple players that could get 100. Maybe Dallas Goedert is that option down the seam. I know this past week, I think it was more on K. Dotton dropping the ball and Baker having bad ball placement. But tight ends can take advantage of our defense. Multiple Eagles will have 100+ yards is my take for this week.
Sweet. So you heard it here first. Jacob thinks that 2 Eagles will have 100+ yard performances, whether that's a combination of AJ Brown, Devontae Smith.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. I think Saquon Barkley, and I saw I think the betting line already set that Saquon's over-under is like 102.5 yards.
Yeah, I saw 105.5, which I've never seen above 100 except Ashton Genty, who should win the Heisman, but I don't think he will. I think it'll go Travis Hunter. But
but to see a line like that, like it's insane. And I think this guy could easily go for 150, like I said, 250 even, with a few touchdowns. And I think AJ Brown or Devontae Smith will get mismatches with whoever is not covering them in terms of JC Horn. Dane Jackson's a liability. Some of our linebackers are even a liability in coverage. So definitely a good take there. And then obviously, to reiterate again, I think the Seahawks sweep the Cardinals. So stay tuned for Thursday when we do our preview show for that Eagles game. We get a little bit more into the nitty gritty. Maybe even have a couple film clips and stats for you guys to kind of hone in on. And then we'll talk about a couple key games coming up this week. Thursday night's looking like a doozy between the Packers and the Lions, especially with how depleted the Lions are right now with injuries. But more to get into on Thursday. And again, follow us on Twitter, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your content, we'll be there. And we'll catch you guys on Thursday.